are in lecture 44 and this is the second segment, and in this segment we will be looking at the principle of systemic interpretation. So, in the earlier video we discussed the general idea of how arbitral tribunals interpret the IAA provisions, and in this particular video we will be looking at the principle of systemic interpretation. So, it is very clear to us that the arbitral tribunal will interpret a provision of IAA and then arrive at a decision. Is it possible to reconcile environmental concerns in international investment regime through interpretation is something that we are going to discuss in this video. And there is a possibility of doing that. How can that be done? You know, Article 31 of VCLT talks about certain factors that has to be considered when a tribunal interprets any treaty, right. So, in the earlier video we have seen Article 31 has 3 paragraphs, and the first paragraph is talking about various factors including good faith, then ordinary meaning, context and object and purpose of the treaty. The second paragraph elaborates on what can be considered to be the context of the treaty. Then come to the third paragraph. Third paragraph is again talking about, in addition to context, what are the other things that has to be considered. So, I mean basically it says that the third paragraph lays down that in addition to context, other normative element that has to be considered by the arbitral tribunal. So, in the third paragraph, particularly if you look at point number C, that states that any other relevant international rules as applicable between the parties have to be given weightage by the arbitral tribunal. And we are going to talk about Article 31, paragraph 3, point number C, and how this particular provision will help an arbitral tribunal to integrate environmental concerns in the field of international investment law. Okay, so how can that happen? So, if we look at Article 31.3c, so here the phrase says that other international rules have to be applied. There is one report by International Law Commission on fragmentation of international law, where the report has acknowledged that there are many specialized fields within international law, and therefore within these specialized field, the decisions are taken by interpreting within these fields, keeping these fields as a self-contained regime. So, that is what the report highlights as fragmentation of international law. So, we know that the ILC itself is acknowledging that there could be contribution to fragmentation of international law, and therefore it suggested the principle of systemic integration, so that the international law in its entirety would be considered. So, how did it rely on, how did it suggest for principle of systemic integration? It relied on Article 31.3c. So, what did ILC say? ILC said that 31.3c clearly mandates that other relevant international rules will be applicable, whatever is applicable between the two parties. When that scope is there, scope of considering other international rules, then there is a possibility of systemic integration. In order to give effect to this particular provision, ILC report stated that 3 things can be done. And the first thing is to reinstate the central role of international law, and secondly to give weightage to other conventional international law, and the third thing is the development of international law. So, basically intertemporality, so as and when it develops. So, these 3 things can be considered, and weightage can be given to Article 31.3c. This is what ILC report is talking about. Especially Mr. Mansfield in this report had stated that either there can be negative articulation or a positive articulation with regard to Article 31.3c in the context of customary international law and general principles of international law. So, therefore, there is the international law in its entirety will be looked at. So, that is what ILC report is talking about. ILC report is also, we can see, referring to Pope and Talbot case and investment dispute, and it has also acknowledged international investment law to be a specialized field of international law. Right. So, when it acknowledges international investment law to be a specialized regime within international law, then using article 31.3c, we can still ILC report itself has acknowledged the connecting role of article 3.3c to be applicable on international investment law. So, how will it be applicable? When any of the treaty provisions of an IIA had to be interpreted, then the tribunal can invoke article 31.3c and then look at that particular issue in the entirety of international law. So, that sort of a possibility is still there. So, that is why we say that if a tribunal invokes article 31.3c, then we can say that the tribunal is undertaking an interpretation method that is systemic interpretation method, that what was envisaged in the ILC report with regard to fragmentation of international law can be seen to be applied here. So, this is how there could be a principle of systemic interpretation which can reconcile environmental concerns even in investment disputes. We are already seen in the earlier week with regard to earlier video with regard to how the applicable law component of applicable law and making an international environmental instrument to be an applicable law could also result in reconciling environmental interest in investment law. So, similarly, this is one other factor. Through an interpretation method, we can look at other international environmental principles, and that can be applied or that can be given weightage while deciding an investment dispute. So, this is one other way, but there are certain challenges that an arbitral tribunal would face while applying the principle of systemic integration or systemic interpretation. We will look at those challenges in detail in the next video. Thank you.